So I'd like to welcome those of you who are here in person, and I think we have 63 people online, to the League's Legislative Policy Committee for today, which is June 6, 2022, which is the anniversary of D-Day, and it's a great time to remember the people that sacrificed from the greatest generation to defeat the forces of totalitarianism in the world. I'm going to say hi to Wayne Niederhauser. Maybe I should have pursued the virtual option too, but it's kind of hard to do that. So I hated to leave the meeting that you were just in. So anyway, welcome, and I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Okay, I heard a motion. Is there a second? Second. Okay, I see a hand in the back anyway. Thank you. So, all right, all in favor? Aye. Okay, those are approved. Then we're going to reorder the agenda a little bit. We have Wayne Niederhauser, who's the state homeless coordinator, online. And I just came from a meeting down in Draper where the mayors in Salt Lake County were working on sorting through the sites that have been submitted by those cities pursuant to legislation recently passed to try to pick a temporary resource center for or temporary winter shelter. So, Wayne, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well as other things. So, Wayne, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Silvestrini, and I just want to give a shout out to the mayor here. What a rock star he's been in this process with Salt Lake County cities and mayors. Appreciate all his efforts and commitment to helping us make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. So thanks for some time today. I'm just going to lay out a couple of things that I see as policies going forward for the state with regards to homelessness. Excuse me. The State Office of Homeless Services, along with the State Homelessness Council, who is led by Gail Miller and Whitney Clayton, are working on a strategic plan this summer. We are reaching out to a lot of entities. One of those will be cities and governments to help inform the strategic plan. I don't know how many people you've got on site, but I'll try and recap a little bit. A big shout out for Mayor Silvestrini and the effort he's made with regards to this process and selecting an overflow shelter in Salt Lake County. Him and Mayor Walker have been great leaders in that with the COM, that's the Council of Mayors under the COG, too many acronyms. But anyway, I'll just reemphasize the process that the state is going through now to do a new strategic plan. We do have a strategic plan, but it's a little bit older. I think we've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and so it's time to do another strategic plan. We want to have the voice of the cities involved in that, and we'll be reaching out. The State Homelessness Council, led by Gail Miller and Whitney Clayton, are a big part of that process. And of course, the State Office of Homeless Services. But I just want to emphasize today that every city in this state has people that end up in homelessness, either through reentry from incarceration, mental health issues, lots of trauma, harm, loss. People end up in homelessness, and they originated all over the state. But we find only a few cities are actually responding to that crisis that we're facing across Utah. And this has got to, this is an area where we need to have a lot of further discussion and some policy discussion as to how all communities get involved in dealing with homeless services and affordable housing. because that's going to be a key to making it better statewide. So I've been across the state. I know this is a statewide issue. I know that all communities originate people that end up in homelessness. It's a community problem. It's a statewide problem, and it's going to take community and a statewide effort to make it a lot better than what we have today. And the most important thing is supportive housing. And I want to emphasize it has to be supportive and it has to be housing. Take away housing and support doesn't work. You have to be in a stable and safe place to even begin to deal with your drug addiction, your mental illness. Take away support from housing, and that doesn't work. I know a lot of people because I spend a lot of time on the streets talking with unsheltered individuals, and what I find is that most of those who have been chronically homeless have been in and out of housing multiple times. They've been in and out of drug rehab multiple times. They've been in incarceration multiple times. Not all, but at least a fair amount of those individuals. And so they're in a cycle, a really bad cycle, a cycle that they continue to spin in that they can't seem to get out of. And supportive housing is a big answer to that question of how we help people to help themselves and to flourish. And we have a lot of examples of that, but they're too rare in our state. And so we've got to have a greater discussion as the league, as the state, as the legislature, on how we can involve all communities in an all hands on deck approach to homelessness across the state. You know, we see it in the central cities like St. George, Salt Lake, Ogden. That's where it's most prominent. I see it a little bit in Logan because I spend some time up there because that's where I'm from. But we've got to have all communities involved in this in some way to really make a difference in the long run. And so, you know, we've got to talk about, you know, how everybody in the state's going to be is going to participate, and the process that we're going through now in Salt Lake County was informed by House Bill 440, passed by the legislature, that that identifies this need of spreading the load around a little bit, and so this overflow shelter. It's always kind of been focused in Salt Lake City, but that's really not fair to Salt Lake. I know they are kind of a central place for services, but all the communities in Salt Lake County need to participate. And this has been an amazing experience to go through the COM process here, led by Mayor Walker from Draper. And I think we're going to come up with a solution for this next winter. But it's not just Salt Lake. It's just not Salt Lake County. It's Davis County. It's Utah County. It's Weber. It's Cache. It's Washington. And even our rural communities have homelessness. So I see the legislature in the future, and we probably need to start having these discussions now, how we're going to ask the question of how all communities can participate in this in one way or another, and what does that look like? And we're hoping that the league will be a big part of in crafting that and identifying how we have a broad approach, a more inclusive approach across the state. I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
So my first question for you, and then we will ask you any questions that arise in the room. So we're looking for hands. Somebody raise your hand if you have a question.
Like 1 or 2 questions.
We have time for a couple of questions. Can you quickly articulate the Commission on Housing Affordability subgroup on deeply affordable housing and how that dovetails into your pursuit on permanent supportive housing?
Okay, thanks. Commission on Housing Affordability Well, they're going to address a lot of issues. They've addressed the issues before. I'm not sure what new things we'll address, because affordable housing, it really isn't necessarily a rocket science thing. You know, we've got, is it fees that the cities require? Is it subsidies? Is it, you know, we talked a lot about these things in the future, in the past, and but what I see us going forward, I've been working on this heavily, is through tax credits and through some of this one-time money that we have with the state and with a lot of entities, we really can make a difference right now. We got the state, or our office got $55 million out of the legislature. And this would be a competitive grant process so that entities all across the state now can ask for a grant to help fund infrastructure, the actual housing. It's for deeply affordable housing, so 30% AMI and below. And this grant process will help subsidize this low, deeply affordable. I mean, people in this situation are not able to pay a lot of rent. I think the average is between $250 and $450 a month. But we have models both in the private sector for profit and the private sector nonprofit, where with a little bit of one-time money like this, we can make a lot of difference in getting housing. Plus, we're working closely with Health and Human Services. That will be their official name as of July 1st. It won't be Health and Human Services now, they'll be combined with the Medicaid expansion, which will fund a lot of the services. This is addiction and mental health needs of this population, which is deeply needed. Again, housing and support have to go together. One without the other doesn't work. And so those are some things that we'll look at. There's also this need of rent flow. We got to look at how we approach rent flow. Where does that rent come from? Vouchers are limited. We've looked at LIHTC, which is low-income housing tax credits. We also have to, look to some of our municipal partners. These are populations that have come from their community or are existing in their community. How are you dealing with your low-income housing needs in your community? What are you doing with your set aside for low-income housing CDA funds? All that is on the table. All those are things we're going to be discussing. Those are some things that the league will need to be weighing in on. We're hoping that you'll take a proactive approach as a league in identifying some things that that cities, municipalities can do wherever you're at to help participate in this. But it really boils down to housing, Cameron, and the support. And I've identified some models that I think potentially will work. We're going to have the legislative buy-in. But with all that, even with the money, we got to have the land use. You have to say yes to deeply affordable housing. And some people might think that, well, we don't want those people in our neighborhood. But really, when the support is right in this housing, the impacts are minimal. And I can identify, and I can show you a couple of situations where these facilities have been approved, and that you might have emergency like fire and medical issues a lot of times because of the aging population that we have in homelessness. But the police incidents are very are almost normal to a regular housing project. So the impacts are not great. I think a lot of people have a lot of fear that's unfounded. Shelters are another issue. That there are a lot of police incidents around shelters. But when we're talking about deeply affordable housing, don't think I think your community is not going to be impacted greatly by that permanent, that deeply affordable housing. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for with that, but those are some of the areas that we'll be looking at. Okay, so there's also a couple chat questions. How can the league support cities in providing guidance and legislative support for affordable housing ordinances, especially when they would engender opposition from developers? Not really sure. That's from Harrison Johnson. So we'd be in competition with developers. I'm assuming that's what that's talking about. I will answer the second question in a moment. Well, when we're talking about deeply affordable housing, there's not very many developers that get involved in deeply affordable housing. And so we're not really competing with the development community as a whole. When you get up into affordable housing, like 60% AMI and 80% AMI, yeah, you would be competing. And that's not where I think we should focus, because there are tools that make that happen through the normal processes. We're talking about deeply affordable housing, and it's really hard to make a 30% AMI work at all without all kinds of one-time money from entities and from and some kind of a subsidy one time. Probably from the state. Hopefully counties will participate also. This is a huge need across our state. I don't know if that answers that question. What plans for services are there when facilities are housed in cities on a rotational basis? What will that look like? Well, the idea is we don't get to it. We're not long-term rotational basis that's kind of more of a shelter issue. When we're talking about permanent supportive housing, we're talking about permanent housing. This is housing people. They will be able to pay some rent, but it will be subsidized by a voucher, by some other means. But these are locations where people are going to live and hopefully work. And if there's the inability to work as much as the general population, then there will be the services there to help keep people stabilized and flourishing, building a sense of community. Anyway, I don't know if that answers that question or not either. Are there any other questions? Oh, we're wrapping it up. Okay, I'm told that we have to wrap it up. So anyway, that's my perspective. It is going to be a statewide issue. Everybody's going to need to participate one way or another. We need land use. We need cities to give us the green light on land use for deeply affordable housing, and hopefully we'll spread this load across the state and help people who are experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Wayne. And I'll just say to those who have questions or want to discuss this more fully with respect to your individual municipalities, feel free to reach out to me or to league staff, because we can talk a little bit more about some of the questions in the chat and other things as well. But I will say that in terms of keeping with our goal to preserve local control, that if cities don't step up and help to solve this problem with the state, we will see more attempts to preempt our local control. So the effort in Salt Lake County that's underway right now to try to choose a temporary winter shelter is something I think that is consistent with that policy of trying to preserve local control. And we may have time at the end of this to talk about this a little more further. But I do want to move on now, because I think we have Candace Assenegger, who from the Division of Water Resources, who wants to update us on water issues. So Candace, welcome.
good. Thank you, Candace.
Good afternoon. I'm always grateful and for opportunities to talk about water and kind of where we're at. Water is a big deal. As you guys probably are well aware that we have been in drought. Actually, if you look over the last decade, 8 of the last 10 years, we've been in drought. Who remembers last year? I do. Can't forget it. I was driving by this sign one day and it was the middle of July. Great Salt Lake had just hit record lows. Lake Powell hit record lows, and there was this sign that said, "God, whatever you're baking, I think it's done," because it was so hot. And I quickly pulled over and my daughter was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, yeah, this just resonated with me. Generally speaking, we are in a better position than we were last year. In July of last year, it was crazy. It was like 99.94% of the state was an extreme and exceptional drought. So those dark red and those dark and the lighter red colors. And I said, I think we're safe to round that to 100% of the state being in drought. And because of the monsoons that came in August, it really helped out. It increased our soil moisture. And all we kept saying is, if we just have a banner snowpack year, we'll be good. We'll survive another year. Unfortunately, it's not quite what we got, right? Our peak snowpack was about 25% below normal, and it peaked 2 weeks early. So we always, in the water world, we always talk about our peak snowpack being April 1st. So remember that weekend in mid-March where it was like 80 degrees? No? Yeah, maybe. I was in St. George, and up here it got up to 80 degrees, and we lost about 10% of our snowpack in that one weekend. So projecting, that means our streams are flowing less than normal, and that also means our reservoirs didn't increase as much as we had wanted them to. So, and I should have warned you guys, I'm an engineer, so I love graphs and data. So this is probably a chart you guys are familiar with seeing, snow water equivalent, which is the amount of water if you took a bucket of snow and you melted it and you measured how much water. That's what, when we talk about snow water equivalent, that's what that means. So generally on the x-axis is our water year from October through September, and then that snow water equivalent is on the y-axis. And so if you look at this top blue line, that's the most snow that we've ever recorded. And if you look at the bottom red, that's the least. And so this year was kind of a roller coaster year. We started out pretty good in October, and then if you follow the graph along, you can see how we dip below the red line. So showing you that we hit new record lows for our snowpack in early December. And then we jumped up a huge amount, and then we stayed the same. We didn't get any more snow for like 6 weeks. And then, like I said, we peaked early. And we started our runoff. Thankfully, we did get some additional precipitation. So this is last water year as far as precipitation. So it's similar to snow water equivalent, but it kind of captures the rainfall as well. And you can see we got some bump up, which is great, but we're still below average. So what does this mean in general? It means that our reservoirs didn't refill. And reservoirs are a critical part of our infrastructure, our water infrastructure, including not only just for our water infrastructure, but also for our recreation. I heard a story of someone in St. George took a phone call, and they're like, "Can you fill up Sand Hollow? It's pretty low." It's like, obviously we can continue to improve on our water education and what that means. So right now our statewide storage is about 63% of capacity. About the same time last year, we're about 67. So we're not horrible. The challenge is because of last year, it kind of puts us in a bad spot this year, and it's definitely regionalized. The Sevier River Basin in the center of the state has still a lot of really low reservoirs. Weber Basin was hit hard this last year in the drought. So there's a lot of concerns kind of moving forward. We do recognize that reservoirs are designed for different purposes and they hold different amounts of water. Like if you think of a big reservoir like Strawberry, is going to hold more water than, you know, a smaller reservoir like Pineview or Echo or East Canyon, and they all have different purposes. But if you look at it generally, this is our this green line is our current year, and showing below once again where we've been in the past. And then if I should have invited me, because now I just have another sad slide. If you look out into the future, it's showing that we're going to be hot our seasonal outlook. So June, July, and August. We are grateful that May was, it happened to be cooler than average. We didn't get a normal amount of precipitation, but it was cooler, so that was good. But it's looking like our probability is pretty on the hot side of things, and equal chances of whether we'll get normal precipitation or not. And then Great Salt Lake, like I mentioned, last year hit record lows, and it's projected to hit record lows again. Because our reservoirs are so low, any runoff that did come was captured in our reservoirs and didn't make it to Great Salt Lake. It typically rises about 2 feet on average, and this year it's less than a foot that it rose, and it's already declining, and we are expected to hit a new record low in the coming weeks. And did not mean to bring all this kind of dire information to you all during your lunch hour. The benefit is there are things that we can do. We can really focus on how we use water, not in our cities, in our towns, in our houses, in our businesses. We can do a lot, and the state has supportive programs for that. We have rebates for smart timers, for toilets. We're working with districts there are some districts that have a Flip Your Strip or a Localscape Rewards, so those are landscaping rebates. And because of some of the legislation that was passed this last year with HB 121, we're working on getting a statewide program implemented this year as well, so then there'll be statewide rebates. And we also have a Slow the Flow campaign we've been able to leverage and use to really kind of communicate the drought message and where we're at, but we're really trying to drive at this is a long-term kind of issue, and we need to have long-term solutions with it. A couple of other updates. The legislature did provide $250 million. They appropriated $250 million to go toward grants for secondary metering. So as an update, we had, that was provided to the Board of Water Resources. The board had an open application period from May 1st through April 1st through May 15th, excuse me, I got the dates wrong. And we had 70 applications, and there was $208 million requested. So a big chunk of that money was requested. It still has to go through the board process, and all those applications have to be reviewed, but it shows the interest in it. And it's pretty exciting. The reason why we care is because by just metering and informing customers of what they are using in their landscapings, they've seen reductions between 20 and 30%. Another really important piece that definitely is right up your guys' alley is integrating water and land planning. And so this is really kind of connecting those groups of people, you folks, and then the water suppliers to really get to this point of how we grow matters, and it sets our water use patterns for decades to come. In 2021, the legislature appropriated $270,000, which we were able to leverage with some additional funds from the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, and we completed a phase 1 of that project in which we created a framework for integrating land use and water planning, and a stakeholder checklist and those type of things. And now we're working on phase 2, in which we're going to actually hold workshops. So we will have an open application period that if your city or your town is interested in participating in that workshop, you can reach out to us and I can let you know. I haven't seen the actual dates of the application period, but I can let you know when they are. I know the workshop will be this fall. And then this goes right up with this other piece of legislation that was passed this last session with the help of Utah League of Cities and Towns was SB 110, which is really integrating water into the general plan. So adding that water and preservation element. And I think those plans are due to be updated by 2025. And the Division of Water Resources, my agency, was provided some funds to help with some of the technical assistance. So happy to talk through that too, and I have a bunch of cards if you guys have any questions. So the question is about entities that have sewage treatment plants that don't discharge, that they go to sewage lagoons, those type of things. And has there been any consideration of providing funds to help leverage being able to upgrade those facilities so they could either discharge or reuse the water? Did I get that, Craig? Yeah. Okay, awesome. So to be honest, I haven't heard of any particular discussions regarding that. I think it's a great idea, and kind of in the situation we're at, all the things have to be on the table. So I think that's a great thing to bring up, and I will take it to my higher ups because I like that idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Candace.
Okay, now we want to hear from the Honorable Paul Farr about an update on judicial issues. So Judge Farr, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm also joined by, we have Mike Drexel, who is some of you may be familiar, he is the Assistant State Court Administrator. And then in the back, we also have Jim Peters, who's the State Justice Court Administrator. I'm here to talk about justice court reform and a proposal that's floating around. I do want to give a brief background. And before I do that, I also want to thank Roger, too, who served on the task force, and I understand has been giving updates over time as well. But real quick background, in 2018, the Utah Supreme Court had some concerns with the de novo appeal process, and they put together a small internal group to look at that process and really with instructions to see what options might be available for eliminating de novo appeals. For those of you that may not be familiar with that process, in the state court system, if somebody has a felony or a higher level civil case, if the individual is not satisfied with the result, they have the right to appeal their case. That appeal goes to the Utah Court of Appeals, where a panel of appellate judges reviews the lower court or the trial court's decision. They review it for correctness and determine if it was the correct decision or not. In justice courts, handling misdemeanors and small claims cases, when a party is dissatisfied, their right to appeal is called de novo. That means the case goes to the district court, where there is a new trial scheduled. So it's not a review of the lower court's decision, it is a brand new trial. It's like starting over. Some concerns have been raised about that process. Just some of them that we've had through this process include that it's inefficient. We're having two trials. In some cases that can even include two jury trials for the same case. One of the big concerns is in cases involving, for example, domestic violence. It can result in a victim having to testify twice, once in each trial. There's no feedback to the justice court judge because, again, the court is not reviewing that judge's decision, it's just doing it all over again. Because of that, we don't have a body of case law around a lot of the issues that arise in the misdemeanor cases and small claims. It's also not as transparent because we don't have these written appellate decisions. So those are just some of the concerns arising with de novo appeal. So for approximately a year, this internal group analyzed, went around the state, met with courts, other stakeholders to determine what options might be available. And ultimately, the internal group determined that yes, it would be a good idea to look at changing the de novo appeal process, but it's also such a large, or the scope is so large to make that change that we really needed participation from stakeholders, further evaluation. So in late 2019, the Judicial Council and the Supreme Court created a task force specifically to look at this issue. Again, Roger was gracious enough to serve on that task force, gave great input. We had a member of the Senate, member of the House of Representatives, representative from the League of Cities and Towns, from Prosecutors Association, Defense Council, judges at district, appellate, and justice court level, and others. That group met for about a year and a half and we looked at studies that had been done throughout the country. We had experts both locally and nationally that presented to the task force. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of material that were reviewed. Having been involved with this, I can say I think it's the most in-depth, comprehensive evaluation of courts at this level that's been done anywhere in the country. And as a result of that work, the task force prepared a report. It was presented to the Utah Judicial Council in August of last year, and the council accepted that report and then asked for basically additional in-depth analysis and also reaching out to partners even more than we previously had. The recommendations purposefully were at a very high level, philosophical, what makes the most sense legally. We purposefully avoided some of the details, like the financial issues, because we knew if we were to get entangled in that at that level, we would never get anywhere. So this is viewed as a best practices. Now we need to put the numbers and the substance behind it. And ultimately, there is a report. It's online. We can get you the website for that as well. But there is a structural proposal. There are some necessary recommendations that would go along with that change, and then there are also an additional about 15 recommendations that aren't necessary, but the task force also thought was a good idea. As for the structural proposal, the idea was to create a division within the district court, and that misdemeanor offenses and small claims cases be transferred or handled by that division. So it's not really creation of a new court level, but a division within the district court to handle those cases. The justice courts, again, under this proposal, would be left in place, but their jurisdiction limited to infractions. And I'm going to talk more about that infraction process as well. Did I hear a question? No. All right. So what this would do is at the division court, it would require that all judges, because as a court of record, there are some constitutional requirements and requirements from the U.S. Supreme Court. Judges would all have to be full-time. They would have to have law degrees. They would basically be treated similar to a district court judge. However, they would be assigned the magistrate duties like issuing warrants, making release determinations from jail, and handling these misdemeanor and small claims cases. Again, that would be a state function at the division. One of the questions that we couldn't answer is what to call this court level. Just as an example, we couldn't call it the superior court because it's not. We didn't want to call it the inferior court, and there was a lot of debate. So if you'll hear it discussed as the division court. That's not necessarily the name. It's just a division in the district court. That is where all of those cases would be handled. Appeals from those cases would go to the Court of Appeals, just like current cases out of the district court. What would happen with the justice court cases is we're, first of all, proposing, and again, this isn't necessary as part of the structural recommendations, but a recommendation is to look at a more efficient way to handle the infractions. A couple of proposals with that. First of all, right now there is an online dispute resolution program in the justice courts. It was a pilot. It's now filtering out through all of the courts. Many are using it. It's not everywhere yet. That proposal, or that online dispute resolution program, is working very well to help the courts be more efficient. And the thought is that that could fairly easily be transformed to help people resolve, for example, their traffic tickets. And it would be this online process. Many people that come into court are confused because whether you have a traffic ticket or a domestic violence assault, the process in justice court is very similar. You have the same hearings, the same process. And that can be very confusing and intimidating, especially for someone on their speeding ticket. They just want to talk to somebody. And so the thought would be with this online dispute resolution program, that could be more efficient. We also looked at systems in different states. The one that seemed to have the most promise was in Hawaii. There's a very informal process for resolving speeding tickets in Hawaii. It doesn't require a full-blown trial, but it gives the opportunity for the individual to come in and just talk to the judge with the officer that issued the citation. The judge can make a decision. Yeah, question?
We have a question online from Lynn Pace. Under this proposal, who would hire the judges and court staff? Would it be the city, county, or state?
Good question. So with the division court, those judges and the court would be a court of record, and under the current constitution, the governor would appoint judges in courts of record. Now, the proposal here is that as we create this court system, we would utilize the current justice court judges that are eligible and interested to populate the court. But then if there are openings that are not filled, or as there become vacancies, it would be the governor that would appoint that. Thank you. Thank you. And so again, the idea would be the justice courts, for those cities that want to keep them, they would stay in place handling infractions. Hopefully it would be a more efficient process. Now, some of the questions, and the biggest question that comes out of this is how are we going to pay for it? And so I want to address that a little bit. But before I do that, I do also want to address some of the proposals that were not pushed forward by this task force. One question is, well, why not just eliminate justice courts, have everything go to the district court? Several reasons why the task force thought that that was not the best solution. One is, can you imagine having a traffic ticket and being put on the same calendar, the same court level as felonies, and those cases, the time that you'd have to wait to get to court? It would be significantly less efficient. We would basically be taking the most expensive tool that we have to handle the least expensive problem. There's also concerns with appeals that arise that way. In other words, do you still want your traffic ticket, speeding ticket, to have the right of an appeal at the Utah Court of Appeals where there's briefings? And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the idea would be to keep justice courts in place where those infractions are handled. It can be efficient. Appeals would still be de novo in those cases. But that was one proposal. The other idea that was discussed was, why not just make justice courts courts of record and eliminate de novo appeals? Some of the reasons that that was not pursued is that that would require constitutional amendment. And then there are also issues about, again, with a court of record, by constitutional law, the judge has to be full-time, has to be a member of the bar. And so do we want to take, you know, the 80-something justice court judges that we have throughout the state, or those positions, and make them all full-time with members of the bar? And again, that was a significant change that didn't make as much sense. So that's why we have the proposal, and I can get in more detail. Trying to summarize in about 15 minutes, a year and a half of work. So if there's questions, please let me know and I'll try to answer them. So ultimately, again, this report with these recommendations was adopted by the Judicial Council, like I said, the end of last year in August. Since that time, we have been trying to add more substance to them, including those, how are we going to pay for it? It's a monumental task just to determine how to pay for something of this magnitude. Just to give you an idea, we did a very brief preliminary look at the justice courts, and it appears that the justice courts are approximately $42 million that they bring in revenue, and it's also approximately $42 million that they cost. However, that doesn't mean that if we transfer these cases to the division court that those costs stay the same. The idea would be that, first of all, the misdemeanor and small claims cases that are transferred to the district court, the revenue from those cases would necessarily have to follow. However, as many of you are probably aware, it's the misdemeanor cases that take most of the expense of your court, with public defenders and court time and judge time, and it's the traffic cases that bring in most of the revenue, and there's very little court time involved. So if we only take the revenue from the misdemeanor and small claims, it would leave cities and towns with a great windfall, with all the money and revenue coming in from traffic, but all the expense leaving. So there would have to be some way to adjust the split of revenue on even the traffic cases so that some of that revenue follows the expense of the misdemeanors arising from those jurisdictions. Those are the details that we are currently looking at. We do have some assistance from the National Center for State Courts. They're going to help the judiciary kind of nail down those costs. We would also like your assistance and input. But that's kind of the next stage, is analyzing those costs and what that formula would look like. Now, also, in the meantime, there is some legislative interest in this proposal. We will be meeting with the Judiciary Interim Committee on June 15th. Looks like that may be a study item with the legislature that they want to look at. One thing that I tell, there's obviously a lot of concerns with a proposal like this among cities, judges, staff, everybody, a lot of concerns, a lot of questions. The one thing I tell people, though, is I think it would be an error to assume that if we don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. You can already see by legislation that's come out over the last few years, there is an appetite at the legislature to make changes at the justice court level. Just this last year, There's already a mechanism that's now been put in place that domestic violence cases can be transferred out of the justice court and handled to the district court. Receiving input that some courts, that might be all of the cases the prosecutors are interested in moving. Other courts may not affect as much. We already had legislation this year to move second DUIs from the justice court to the district court. There was a proposal that did not pass, but that was to take all revenue from highway patrol DUIs in Salt Lake County and take all that revenue away from the cities and put that with the state. Many other examples I could cite too, but there are going to be changes to the justice court. The judiciary's position is, why don't we try to have some control over that, so it's not just piecemeal over a period of time, but that we actually can analyze and do what's right for the citizens of the state. That's the proposal that's out there. And Roger?
If you don't mind me,
Please.
pausing your judge. I want to emphasize one thing following the judge's comments. The motivation for this was not criticism of the justice courts. The motivation for this study was a request from the prosecuting community to get rid of de novos. And that is, they were tired of trying cases twice. There were a number of instances where even the city prosecutors didn't like that system. So that was the initial trigger point for this. It came in many ways from us and others. If you change de novo, and I want to emphasize this, if you eliminate the de novo, you change the structure of the court. Those two are inextricably tied together. So either you go through a process of amending the state constitution. A, politically we didn't think that was feasible, and two, we didn't necessarily think it was wise. The system was set up to say, if you're going to have a de novo system, you can have this sort of informal system. Once you become real courts and real judges, the process for picking the judges is set out in the state constitution. They're appointed by the governor. They're conferred by the state senate. So it's in essence, if you move out of the one system, you move to the other. So I just want to emphasize that was the trigger point for this. Once you made those decisions, then some of these other things fell in line with having to be looked at. There is not a proposal for a bill. There was our recommendation came from our study, but I think it's inevitable that sometime in the future, I don't know if it will happen this fast, you're going to see a discussion of something like this in the near future.
We have two questions on the line. The first from Matt Dixon. This seems like a lot of cost and structural changes to the system for a few de novo cases that end up actually going to district courts. What am I missing? There must be more than simply de novo cases. Wasn't this what the system used to be years ago before most cities were required to set up justice courts?
Yeah, so first of all, this is not an analysis on de novo appeals that we don't like them because of cost or structure. Compared to the system or to the total volume of cases, it is relatively few de novo cases. This was based on rights of defendants, the ability to provide counsel to defendants, the ability to have case law develop among the state. So again, it's not a financial concern.
I would echo that. I think there was a feeling as justice courts became more formal, we were at the dive point to a new system.
Yeah. And then the question about, isn't this how it was years ago? We did have a circuit court system that was in place years ago, and there were issues and problems with that system, but what we have tried to do with the current recommendations is to take the best of that circuit court system, correct the errors. So it is similar to the circuit courts, but it's different.
And I might add, at least from my standpoint, the major issue, once you make some of these changes, they're now the financial responsibility of the state, not local governments.
The last question online, does this move to set up division courts mean that more misdemeanor crimes may be downgraded to infractions?
It could. So there's nothing in the proposal that would require that. It would allow, I suppose, if cities wanted to codify certain offenses and make them infractions and keep them in the justice courts, that's certainly a possibility. At the state level, there's not a proposal to reduce any level of offenses. It's just what's currently a misdemeanor would go to this new division court level. Yeah.
Rob?
Hold on, wait for the mic. Sorry.
Sorry, we've got a couple in the room.
While he's waiting for the mic to get there, let me indicate that, again, there is not a particular bill and not a particular proposal. But this is the direction our 2 years worth of work took us in this direction. Where we'll move and how fast, if at all, will depend a little bit on the next point of how much does it cost and what's your revenue dynamic.
And I guess that's a good segue into my question, Roger. J.J. Allen, Clearfield City. Yeah. Is it premature to even put any kind of time frame to this? Or is this a 5-year effort, a 10-year effort, a 20-year effort? What are we looking at?
So initially, the task force and the Judicial Council was interested in more in-depth study over a period of 1 to 2 years at least to put some of these financial numbers together in a harder proposal, I guess I would say. There is some legislative interest, and of course, you know, what a legislator or the legislature decides to do, we don't have control of that, but we definitely need additional analysis. And I don't know if there's, Michael, if you have any additional thoughts on that either.
I said I'd stay around as long as it's out of a still study item, and I'm trying to leave. So no. My gut feeling is this is probably a 2 to 3 year exercise, because frankly right now the fiscal note will drive the discussion and nobody knows what the fiscal note is going to be. But I would say anybody who thinks it won't happen is wrong. Something's going to get changed. There are enough drivers in this that will move it. Secondly, I think it will take us a little while to generate the information, and then even if it were to be done, it's going to take a multi-year phase-in to deal with this. Having said that, we have justice court cities all the time who are saying they want to leave the system. You have the option to get out now. That is, you exist as a justice court by your choice. And in some instances, this becomes, they say, well, we've been looking to leave anyway. So it's a thing in motion. But JJ, to your question, I think it's a multi-year, but it's not 10.
Yeah, and that is something that was discussed, and you're exactly right. That was one of the big concerns with the circuit courts, and it's also one of the reasons that our proposal didn't say just eliminate justice courts and send everything to the district court, because then we have that exact problem. It's a problem that we currently have. The district court judges are involved in some really important big cases, and sometimes what might be the local domestic violence case or the DUI case has less precedence than the murder or whatever they're working on. The thought is that by creating this division, and we're not assigning district court judges to it, this is somebody that specifically either on creation as a justice court judge that gets elevated to that position, or as somebody that's appointed by the governor specifically to that job as a division, whatever we end up calling them, division court judge. And so they will know going in, these are the assignments. Before there was a little bit of a blending between what was the district court judge's assignment versus what was the circuit court judge going to do. I think we've distinguished that now and have a separate path. And so we anticipate, now will some judges still look at that as maybe a foot in the door to apply to be a district court judge? Sure. But the job is specifically going to be focused on those misdemeanors, the magistrate functions, and those things. So hopefully this proposal would address that. Do you have other questions? I do see online there's a few.
We probably are going to move on. But
okay.
Yeah, Judge Farr, thank you very much.
I want to thank Judge Farr. This is the first time I've actually met him in person in 2 years. So. Thanks.
Yeah, the circuit court's it's deja vu all over again, right? For me anyway, it's where I cut my teeth in my practice. Let's now turn to Representative Robert Spendlove, who's going to address us on the economic outlook. Representative Spendlove is also employed by Zions Bank, so thank you, Representative.
We'll see if I can get his PowerPoint up here. And as Representative Spendlove's jumping up here, I'll just say really quickly, the reason we had these presentations and we didn't do a quick intro at the beginning because we had to get people out the door. People had other meetings, so we appreciate everyone for spending time. But these are obviously issues that are going to come up in this next year or two that we're going to want to deal with. And one of the issues we've got to deal with right now is the economy. Representative Spendlove's actually here in his economist.
Great, thanks so much. I appreciate being with you today. And this building, so I know most people are online, but this building has a place of significance for me. So I had my very first meeting in my career in this building in July of 1999. I was just starting with the governor's office of planning and budget. And Natalie Gochner, if you know Natalie, was my boss, and she brought me down here to meet with the cities. So it's kind of fun to be back. So I just want to quickly, and I've got a lot of slides, and I'm going to skip over, or I'm going to go through them really quickly. But if you'd like a copy of the presentation, or if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to talk later as well. So what I want to talk about, I'm going to start off with the what's happening, and then I'm going to go to the why. And so let's see. If I click.
The arrow.
Oh, there we go.
You got it.
You know, so we're watching really closely what the Federal Reserve is going to be doing. The Federal Reserve will be meeting next week. What you're seeing here is the Federal Reserve has started a process of increasing interest rates. In their last two meetings, they've increased. The Fed really only controls one rate. It's called the federal funds rate, but it influences the other interest rates that are charged. The Fed will be meeting again next week. I expect that the Fed will continue to raise interest rates for the next 6 months to a year. In fact, if you look at the market expectations, so right now that Fed funds rate is at 75 basis points. The market expects that by this time next year, interest rates will be 2% higher than they are right now. So the Fed is entering an aggressive period of increasing interest rates. In their next two meetings, I would guess they'll raise rates by 0.5% each time and then continue on throughout the fall. And then the other part that people don't really talk about very much, because the Fed's never used this tool before, is the Fed's balance sheet. So the Fed goes out on the secondary market and literally buys bonds. And if you look at it, the blue one is Treasury securities, and green one, the green area is mortgage-backed securities. So the Fed has never really sold off this tool before. You can see that they've only been increasing the size of their balance sheet over the last 20 years. However, if you look in 2018 and 2019, this Fed started to sell off their balance sheet, and the markets immediately dropped dramatically. In fact, they called it the taper tantrum. But starting last week, starting on June 1st, the Fed started to allow their balance sheet to go down. The effect of that, if the Fed is selling their Treasury securities, selling their mortgage-backed securities, Treasury securities essentially go into loans for businesses, for business expansion, and mortgage-backed securities, of course, go into mortgages. And so if the Fed is selling those assets, it makes essentially makes the interest rates on those go up. And so you can see the big drop in the NASDAQ is because of that in anticipation of the Fed selling off the Treasury securities, and then the big increases in mortgage rates are because the Fed is selling off their mortgage-backed securities. So that's the what. That's what's happening. Why is this happening? Whoops, let's see. There we go. The big reason, of course, what everyone's talking about is inflation. And we are seeing the highest inflation in 30 years right now. In fact, if you look at it, that 8.3% that we saw last month compares to 1981, but that's when interest rates were coming down. The last time we've seen this high of rates, with rates going up, was in the mid-1970s. And so, so that's the big thing that everyone's struggling with. By the way, Friday is going to be a critical day for inflation. This is when we'll get the new CPI numbers, so I'll be watching that really closely. The big debate, of course, is whether inflation has peaked. Now, there are some signs that the inflation may have peaked. If you look closely on the right-hand side of this graph, the previous month it was 8.5%. Last month it was 8.3%. Now, other thing I want to point out is look at the green line. So the green line is our regional inflation. We don't have specific inflation for Utah, but we have it for the mountain region. And two things that are really interesting about this. You'll notice, number one, in March of 2021 is where we first saw that inflation start to go up dramatically. And then look at July of last year. That's where our mountain region actually disconnected from the national, and we're seeing even higher inflation for our region. So we're at 9.8% down from 10.1% the month before. So the first question is, has that inflation peaked? I think there are some signs. It's debatable. I mean, this is why Friday is going to be so important. There are some indications that it may have peaked, but we still don't know yet. I mean, this could be a false peak, and then that inflation starts to go back up again. And then the next question is, once it has peaked, how low will it be 6 months or a year from now? Will we go back to that 2% that we were seeing a few years ago, or will it settle in at something around 4 or 5%? If it settles in at that higher rate, then the Fed is going to have to become even more aggressive in raising interest rates to slow down that high inflation. Looking at some of the areas, so this is what we call core inflation. Again, the Fed's goal is 2%. And nationally, we're at 6.2%, so 3% or 3 times as high as the Fed wants. In our region, 8%, so we're 4 times as high. Even when you strip out food and energy, our core inflation is still way too high. However, when we look at food, both our region and the nation are over 9% inflation in food prices. If you look at meat prices, it's even more dramatic, closer to about 15% year-over-year inflation. Energy prices, of course, is a big source of that inflationary pressure. This is what everyone is struggling with. In fact, just driving in, I don't know if you noticed that gas station on the corner, the gas was $4.99 a gallon. There's areas in California where their gas is $7 a gallon. So it's something, you know, someone described inflation as the most regressive tax. It really has an inordinate impact on the low income because they don't have alternatives. They can't shift to other areas, especially with inflation so widespread. Looking at those oil prices, we just topped off over the weekend at $120 a barrel. Just 2 years ago, look at that, that oil price was around $25 a barrel. And our range over the last several years has been about $60 to $80 a barrel. And so it is at a very high price relative to where it's been historically. And the pressure continues to mount with those oil prices going up, causing gas prices to go up. Now looking at housing prices. So this is one of those signs, and I included not just the US, but also Utah and Idaho. And the reason I included Idaho was just as kind of I'm seeing Idaho as an early indicator. You can see they're a little bit, Idaho's in yellow, and they're a little bit ahead of our trend. And what you see is that Idaho peaked out at around 36% housing price appreciation. Since then, it's been dropping very quick. Well, I should say it's been slowing. It's still positive, but it's now down to 21%. So Utah hasn't started to drop yet. We're still at 30% annual home price appreciation. But I expect with the Fed actions, with mortgage rates going up, I'm seeing mortgage rates around 5.25% to 5.5% now, that will start to slow that housing price appreciation. We're seeing some signs of that. If you look at the price of wood, which maxed out last year at $1,600 per unit, is now down around $700 a unit. So we are seeing that impact on demand that's starting to slow some of those housing indicators, but we're still much too high. And the big fear, of course, the Fed is trying to orchestrate a soft landing. A soft landing would be that housing price appreciation going down to about 5% a year. But the big fear, if you look at 2009 through 2011, is that the market collapses and we see losses in overall or aggregate housing prices. And that's what the Fed is trying to prevent, but it's too soon to tell for sure. Looking at the job market. So on Friday, we got the jobs report, came in, it was a really good jobs report. So this is a good sign that the economy is still holding up. We had job growth slow for the last 12 consecutive months. We had more than 400,000 jobs created, just under that in May at 390,000. The unemployment rate is stabilizing at 3.6%. Right around that pre-recession level of 3.5%. Now, one thing to keep in mind, look at that red shaded area. That's where unemployment should be. So it's what we call our full employment level, and it's around 4.5 to 5%. When it's below that, you experience what we're seeing, which is labor shortages. And the problem with labor shortages is it drives overall inflation. It makes it really hard for businesses to expand, and we're all experiencing the struggles of that labor shortage right now. Labor force participation, this is another one. It went up, but it just went up a tiny bit last month, and we're still below the pre-recession level of around 63.3%. So while the jobs are growing, we've got to get more people to come up, back off the sidelines and back into the labor force, and we're hoping that we'll start to see that trend in the next few months. And then the wage growth. So a good sign of the last report is that wage growth is starting to moderate a little bit. It's came down to 5.2%, still too high, still too much pressure on employers. But here's one of the big struggles. So the fear of high wage growth is something we call a wage price spiral, where wages jump, and so employers have to raise their prices to keep up with that wage growth. And it's what created the situation in the 1970s where inflation spiraled out of control. So to see that wage growth starting to come down is another sign that inflation may be peaking. But here's the struggle. Back to, if you think about workers, that wage growth is 5.2%. The inflation is 8.3%. So real wage growth is negative. Workers are not being able to keep up with the inflationary pressure. So we've got to get both that wage growth and that inflation down. Looking locally, our economy continues in Utah to do really well, although we are seeing signs of slowing in the Utah economy. Our population was the second fastest growing in the country last year, right behind Idaho. And over the last 10 years, Utah had the fastest growing population in the country. When you look at where that population is growing, really interestingly, in the previous year, Utah County and Washington County had the highest growth, but that growth shifted a little bit as they got a little more expensive and a little more built out. So our highest growth last year was Tooele County with 4.1. Iron County with 6.2, and then Tooele with 4.1, but still really high population growth in Washington and also Wasatch and Utah counties. When we look at employment, so over the last year, Utah's employment growth has slowed significantly. We're now growing below the national average. We're growing at 3.7%. And then you look at states like Nevada and California and New York that are growing much more quickly, also Florida and Texas. But there's a reason for that. So what I did for this one is rather than going 1 year, I went back to the beginning of the pandemic. And you see essentially what happened in Utah is we grew really quickly in the first year of kind of the recovery from the pandemic. And then since then, we've been slowing down. But if you look at the entire period, Utah has the fastest recovery and the highest recovery of any state in the country, growing 5.5% since the beginning of the pandemic. All industries in Utah have grown in the last year, which is really good to see, kind of led by our trade, transportation, utilities, also leisure and hospitality. And where are we seeing that growth? Once again, big growth in Tooele, big growth in Utah County. Also, Washington County growing really strongly. A little more in the rural areas. We saw big growth in San Juan, Duchesne, Paiute. We did have 3 counties that contracted over the last year. Daggett, I think it was Wayne and Garfield, all have employment lower than 1 year ago. When we look at our unemployment rate, so this is one of the reasons that the employment growth is slowing. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and it's also the lowest unemployment our state has ever seen at 1.9%. We're tied with Nebraska for the lowest unemployment rate in the country. Again, remember that 4.5 to 5% is that level that we consider to be full employment. So we are significantly below that level in Utah. And then when you look at the county level, it's even more dramatic. Look at Utah County, 1.6%. Morgan at 1.5, Juab 1.4. So extremely tight labor markets in many parts of the state. Little bit higher unemployment in the Uinta Basin and in the Four Corners area of the state. So kind of putting it all together, how does it look for the rest of the year? So I've been tracking COVID really closely because I think that's been driving a lot of the economic growth. It's looking really good. China just announced that they're reopening Shanghai and Beijing. That should help the worldwide economy. Job creation is good, and it continues to hold up really well. The overall economy is still growing, so that's looking good. The unemployment rate is low. I put that as a neutral indicator because it's if we continue to drop, that could be a problem for the overall economy, but it's looking good. The wage growth is moderating, so I put that as a neutral. We need that to continue to come down along with inflation to come down. On the other side, though, we see that consumer confidence continues to struggle. People are struggling with the current economic environment. Inflation is way too high. I'm hoping that we are seeing that peaking, and we need to see that come down to that 2 to 3% level. Housing prices appear to be peaking, but again, they're way too high, and we need that to come down. And then interest rates will be going up dramatically over the next year. It needs to happen to slow down the economy. To slow down that inflation, but it also will slow down the economy in the process. So with that, I don't know if you want me to take any questions or.
Or no.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so let's next turn to staff and talk about the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission and the Commission on Housing Affordability.
All right, Cam, I'm going to get this set up while you're walking up. But want to thank our guests. Someone may think that was just a really depressing, last 75 minutes, looking at some different issues. But we really want to be aware of the universe that we're going to operate in, and so many of the factors that are going to be impacting that, over the course of the next year. So with that, I'm going to. Is that working? Cool. Cam, have you run through UEOC really quick?
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. The one thing that came to mind as he was talking about the unemployment numbers in Utah is we probably ought to talk about jazz unemployment with Quinn Snyder leaving, figure out how to fill that vacancy. That being said, thank you, Representative, for joining. All these materials will be available on our website and via Friday Facts, and it does, as Justin said, set the stage for all of the moving pieces, not just in the land use space, but everywhere over the next few months. So the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, as a reminder, started last year and really is this parallel track to the legislature. Brings together the executive branch and the legislative branch. Local government has a seat at the table. That's another thing I want to emphasize for all of these big ticket items that we've shared with you today. The league has an official seat at every one of the tables. And that hasn't always been the case in the past, but is clearly the case for all these issues going forward. The Unified Economic Opportunity Commission consists of the governor, the speaker, and the president, and then the department heads in the executive branch. Mayor Don Ramsey from South Jordan represents the league on the UEOC umbrella. And then there are several working groups and subcommittees that have a very aggressive timeline to bring recommendations back to the UEOC by early fall. Now, for those of you keeping track at home, it is D-Day, it's June 6th, so summer officially starts in a fortnight, but it also means that early fall is the next season. So we've got about a 3-month window here where there are expectations that policy concepts come back to the UEOC with language by November. The working groups that are most of note to this group: working group on water infrastructure, working group on growth and transportation, working group on government efficiency, and working group on innovation. These are official subgroup members from local government that we successfully lobbied to make sure we're on each of those 4 work groups. So thank you to the elected officials and one city manager who agreed to serve on these subcommittees. Meanwhile, the Commission on Housing Affordability is now by statute an official subcommittee of the UEOC. So there are the 4 that I just showed you, and you've got the Commission on Housing Affordability, of which there are 3 more subgroups. Okay, hopefully somebody's flow charting this on the back of your napkin. We've done it for you at our office, so you don't have to. 3 subgroups: attainable housing, which is focused on 81 to 120% AMI; low-income housing with a focus on homelessness and permanent supportive housing. So this is what I asked Wayne Niederhauser about earlier, and then rural Utah. And the reason that says TBD is I met with the chair of the rural group last week in St. George, and he actually asked us over the weekend for some names. So when we finish the meeting here in a moment asking for volunteers, for those of you in rural Utah, we are looking for a few names to be able to give to the chair. So the co-chairs of that attainable housing group, which will be looking at land use to a degree, are Orem Council member Tom McDonald, who represents the League on the Chaw, and Chris Gambroulas from Ivory Homes. So they're the co-chairs on the attainable. The low-income housing, the chair of that is Beth Holbrook from the Utah Transit Authority, and then Andrew Johnston is one of the League's reps on the Chaw, so he'll be in that low-income group. And then, as I mentioned, the rural folks. Representative Waldrop will still continue as co-chair of the CHA along with Senator Lincoln Fillmore. They specifically said they wanted to look at the fair share concept for cities doing their part when it comes to planning for housing, but they wanted to leave that at the chair level rather than having a work group look at it. I'm sitting down with Representative Waldrop in the next few days, and Senator Fillmore as well, to get a better understanding of where they want to go and how it dovetails into the already existing efforts from SB 34 and House Bill 462 from last year, recognizing that House Bill 462 is now 5 days old. Meanwhile, an unofficial subgroup of the CHA is the Land Use Task Force. So the Land Use Task Force is going to be providing support in the policy space to the attainable housing subgroup. So you can see who the current negotiators are within the Land Use Task Force. We had a meeting this morning where the Property Rights Coalition brought their priorities, and we had our priorities based on the feedback we heard from the members via survey at the mid-year conference and everything else from this past spring. In addition to the CHA, we also have the technical lane where issues that are related to the Land Use Development and Management Act but aren't necessarily CHA issues will be looked at within the Land Use Task Force. Frankly, the reason we use the Land Use Task Force process is to try to prevent bad anecdotes from turning into bad laws. It's also an opportunity for us to understand the challenges that our cities as well as development communities are facing on the front lines and try to address them. So again, the deliberations are underway. What I've highlighted in orange is that fair share language. The one thing I want to emphasize is where we started last year, when we were having these conversations last year, we didn't know where the ending would be within the CHA. And there were multiple discussions throughout last year's interim about changing the 50-50 formula, imposing housing quotas on cities, mandatory minimum densities, and preempting local zoning. None of which happened by the time House Bill 462 and House Bill 151 made it to the finish line. So a lot's going to happen between now and then, but I think it's important to remember where we are now and where we were last year. So this is what we discussed as of 3 hours ago within the Land Use Task Force, where the starting points are going to be. So within the task force, we're going to be looking at development standards. So there'll be a subgroup looking at development standards, a subgroup that's looking at this is the shorthand, but moratorium guardrails. So when a city does a moratorium on development, especially how that interplays with drought challenges, looking at development agreements and the use of development agreements, and then annexation and incorporation. There was one specific issue that arose in Davis County that really highlighted this, but this is an issue in Tooele County and other places around the state. Then independent of Land Use Task Force, but other land use related issues that will also have subgroups with them are related to domestic duty requirements for water supply, the state auditor letter around the use of development fees, land use near airports, short-term rentals, and the local regulation thereof, and then the database around House Bill 462. So I know in the last 4 minutes now, I've just thrown a lot of stuff at you, but the goal really now is if there are any topics that we have laid out to you during today's meeting, like this is the universe, well, almost the entire universe. We have the Loveless and Lead Task Force that's also looking at some public safety stuff. But this is the general universe for the summer. So if there are items that you want to make sure that your city is plugged in somewhere, now's your chance to make sure that we as staff know, because we are trying to coordinate all of these moving parts to make sure that the dialogue that's happening everywhere, whether it's me speaking or Councilmember Newell from Conduit Heights speaking, or Mayor Tran from Kaysville speaking, or Mayor Randall from St. George speaking, within any of these groups, that it's all coordinated and consistent with the league platform and our principles around local control. Justin, I'll turn it over to you to solicit volunteers, but are there any questions for me while I'm up here? Well, Justin, I do feel like I need to say that I am, at this point, not planning to be a candidate for the Jazz vacancy. Not saying I want to take a phone call if it came. Okay, take it away.
So what I just heard is Cam is definitely a candidate for the Jazz vacancy, and because that's what you always say when you're not a candidate for something. I've been in politics too long. So we do need help. So I put up here potential work groups and input needed. There are issues that come up, there are bills that come up, and we need some people to help us out, to give us input on them. If you email me and say, I would love to be a part of a water working group, I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm not going to promise we're going to meet every 2 weeks and talk about water, but we are looking for people who can be on the ready, be on the call when we need to put some people together to look through things. So if you're interested in helping on these topics, I'll read them through just in case you can't see them. Justice courts, if you want to talk about water, short-term rentals, retirement or retention, and then on this one, we are going to be sending out some surveys that will help us get the proper data that we can push back on some of the anecdotes that are out there, some of the discussions that are out there. So as you see these surveys come through, we're working closely with UCMA, but as you see these surveys come through, please make sure it gets to the right people in your city to help us get the information, the data that we need to tell the stories that we need to tell to the legislature. So please watch out for those. And then if you're interested more in Land Use Task Force, CHA, UEOC, you can reach out to Cam. But my email is up there, jlee@ulct.org. Feel free to reach out to me, to email me, and we'll get you on the list there for some of those groups. So Mayor, with that, we just need to talk about upcoming events and any final words you'd like to say.
Yeah, so upcoming events, we have the next LPC on August 15th and another one on September 19th, and that's all I'm aware of. So.
And then.
Yeah, I guess if you haven't already, sign up for the Friday Facts email.
Yes, perfect. And then the one final thing I'll add, Carson reminded me, if you have not got your Legislative Policy Committee, which is this meeting, LPC, in case you wondered where you were, if you have not updated your LPC list for your city, please reach out to us and make sure that we have the right people on that list. Let's see, what you just... Oh, and then this week we will send a follow-up email, again, soliciting help, soliciting people in those work groups, so you can also feel free to respond to that email. So Mayor, I think one final motion?
Yeah, motion to...
Oh,
Cameron?
Cameron said no.
Sorry, this came up at the end of our Land Use Task Force meeting this morning, and so I just want to make it crystal clear here. The goal over these next few months, and the reason the LPC doesn't meet again until August 15th, is because we need to build in enough time for some of these subgroups to actually do some work to bring back for this committee to consider. So the goal is, over the next 2 months, to make some progress in some of these spaces, recognizing that's going to look different depending on the topic, and then we can be bringing things back to this group. The other thing we may find is that our group needs to define the policy platform on a topic so that it provides the guiding principles for the topic. So the subgroup may actually do that, come and then bring it back to the LPC, because the LPC acts as the resolutions body for the league, and that's what sets the policy platform for the organization. So no LPC in July. The subgroups are going to be meeting, and then we won't have full answers ready in August or even September, but we'll be bringing things back for the broader consideration and determining whether or not we need any league resolutions for the annual convention. Thanks. Now I'm done.
Thank you, Cameron. So I think that's it. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Got a motion? Got a second? All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.